Please briefly summarize your industry education, professional background, and current role at Habitat for Humanity International.
I have a master's in urban planning. So that's my primary academic background related to the work that I do. Prior to that, I was actually a secondary school history teacher. Um, Currently at Habitat for Humanity, I am the Senior Director for Housing and Community Strategy. And I lead on the development of strategy and innovation in our housing work for the U.S. Office of the organization.
Do you work with engineers and designers or mostly stakeholders and decision makers?
Mostly stakeholders and decision makers. That's the primary audience.
And what's a typical feedback situation you work with them?
So Habitat for Humanity International is a parent organization that works with about 1,100 and some affiliates across the country. And those affiliates do a range of things and look very different from one another. Some of them are very small, all volunteer offices, and some are major housing organizations with hundreds of employees. Because there's such a range, not only of types of organizations, but also market contexts in which those organizations function, a lot of our work is understanding how they are finding success in the housing sector, serving lower income families and households. What are the things that they are doing that are working? What's not working? What are the primary challenges? And then we work through research, evidence-based methods, piloting new ideas, investing in those ideas, doing some financing, advocacy, as well, some policy advocacy work, making connections for those 1,100 some organizations. Those are the things that we do. We help them to find new opportunity in the affordable housing sector to continue to do the work that our mission dictates. So most of that kind of upfront work looks like taking in data. So an example would be in our aging in place work. We fund work across the country for our affiliates to do more holistic service provision to older adults. Much of that happens in partnership with health partners. So go into a home, assess condition of the home, but also understand the condition of the homeowner or resident, so that both our construction teams as well as our health sector partners are able to serve the needs of that older adult, allowing them to remain in their home and have a better quality of life. So a lot of what we would do is train on how to do this more holistic work. We would secure partnerships and some funding. And then we would also take in data as this method is tested across the country to understand how it's working, if we're seeing the impacts we'd like to see, and then taking in lessons learned to improve that approach and go for another round. So that's a lot of how we engage.
How would you describe the future of housing development, and urban planning?
I would say that we are likely looking at a future in the housing sector that will dictate us considering housing as a need. Right now, housing is very much a wealth building opportunity, an investment opportunity. It's trending toward more of investment opportunity than simply a place for a family to live in many markets. The competition for what typically, the very typical smaller starter home is so intense that most families entering the housing market for the first time as potential owners are priced out or are not willing to compete with cash offers and institutional buyers. So that's in many markets. In other markets, we're seeing homes that require repair or rehab outside of the value of that property, even when once it's improved. So we have this like lopsidedness in the housing market. I will not say that I see the housing market crashing exactly, but I do see a coming moment where we have to shift how we invest in housing in order to meet the needs of a growing number of households that are kind of left out, whether it's through rising rents or, as I stated, the competition in the housing marketplace, or housing that just doesn't suit the needs of folks who are searching for places to live, whether those are larger intergenerational families or whether those are single income homes with one or two people. That is going to continue to be a challenge. So I really think in terms of how we invest in communities and in housing, we will need to begin thinking about the role of government, of the public sector, I believe in a different way. You know, how does the public sector lean on the market differently? Right now, primarily, we just fund unit subsidy if we're looking to create opportunities for affordable housing. Very seldom do we protect the value of that subsidy in that housing over the long term. And so every year we lose thousands of units as we build thousands of units. So we're not getting anywhere. And as we continue with that approach, we're seeing more and more households, even middle income households, not be able to afford to live near job centers and transit and other things. So, you know, that is, for me, the future looks like the public sector and maybe philanthropic sectors considering their role very differently in terms of how we provide housing.
Please describe the Neighborhood Revitalization and Health and Housing Initiative, as well as the 3D printed house project. What type of impact can they make?
Most of the projects I've worked on before coming to Habitat for Humanity were in lower income, disinvested communities in cities. And much of what we were grappling with were decisions made decades before around the design and construction of heavy infrastructure. Most of that infrastructure had been designed without people in mind. So whether it's, you know, kind of a highway removal project I worked on in the South Bronx, where you had a stretch of highway that separated a neighborhood from its waterfront, which was being developed with parkland, or whether you're talking about a manufactured gas plant that had been buried beneath a park, you know, thinking, oh, this is a great place to have, you know, manufactured gas plant because again, to have contamination on the property, had to get that manufactured gas plant out. It set a precedent for how we would address challenges in communities going forward in New York City. A lot of what we are doing in communities today is undoing what's been done in the past. And the challenge with that is, right, we're wasting resources. And often, because of the types of decision-making processes we undertake when it comes to infrastructure investment and design, we don't include the people that live in those places because they're not seen as experts. I think the key thing is to understand that they actually are experts. They can tell you all about what's happening on the ground, how they navigate their community, what the pros and cons are of the changes you're contemplating. They can help you proof test your design. I think sometimes those of us who are trained come in feeling like we know best. And there, of course, are things that we're bringing with us to the table. However, we can actually implement smarter design if we create human-centered processes to allow that to occur. And I'll tell you, the Sheridan Expressway in the South Bronx is the project I was referring to earlier. Um, for about a decade, many organizations in that community had fought to have this little kind of stub of highway that was never completed removed to allow for housing development and access to the waterfront. And against that, like this is like a less than a mile stub of highway that travels from 95 in the Bronx down. Lots of truck traffic. And the State Department of Transportation never wanted to really discuss it. We got into a study with the city of New York, negotiated a truce basically to allow at least for full pedestrian crossings across this small stretch of highway. And it worked. Everybody was really excited. However, the engineers at the New York State Department of Transportation took that plan that everyone negotiated and was kind of happy with, and they added to it a ramp south, a set of ramps south of that mile that will now cut a new section of waterfront off from the community. And of course, everyone is extremely sad about the outcome of that project, and it was completely unnecessary. The community had actually come up with, alongside engineers, a different option that would have still allowed truck traffic to exit into this peninsula without cutting off the waterfront. So I think we have a lot of work to do still to allow us to hear and see each other as full partners in the process of how we design infrastructure so that it lives with community and doesn't exclude or disenfranchise community. So the health and housing work that I talked about earlier around older adults is the primary health and housing work we currently do. It's mostly focused on accessibility and quality of life for older adults. And the 3D printed housing work, we have a couple of our affiliate organizations that have partnered with either engineering or similar groups at local universities that have 3D printing capabilities and are using their partnerships with Habitat affiliates to test their processes, how they work in the real world, and whether or not they're feasible. I think what we've found with a couple of those projects is that right now, 3D printing for housing, at least affordable housing, is not ready to scale. And I could just give you an example. I mean, to have the machines on site, you have to keep them cool. And so we had an affiliate that had to bring in tons and tons, literal tons of ice onto the work site over the course of construction just to have the 3D printing machine continuing to work. That's not scalable. And in addition to that, what we found is that for any of our affiliates to do this work, they have to have that local academic partner institution that has this capacity. So that's also kind of a limiting factor. One of the things we've been talking about is kind of this dream state of, would it even be possible to do kind of 3D printed panelization or modular construction where you're not 3D printing the entire home, but you're 3D printing components that can then be shipped to sites so that you don't have to deal with some of the on-site challenges. You don't have to maybe be adjacent to a major institution that has this capacity. It would open up additional opportunity and still address some of the challenges we have with supply of the things we need to do construction. So we've learned a lot from 3D printing, but it's not something that we're looking to scale right now.
How much should engineers take into consideration social justice, and community strategy in their designs and work, and why?
I think a lot of what I was describing around that transportation project um, was kind of the why that you often don't even realize until much later after you've spent $1 billion. Um, the true impact of a major project on people. And so I think that what we've learned over, especially the last few years, is that the decisions we make and the things we do in communities actually have a significant impact on the outcomes for the people that live in those places. Whether it's, you know, particulate matter in the air and how it affects asthma rates in those communities, or whether it's the walkability of a community that's impacted by how infrastructure investment occurs, or just the livability of that place. So citing infrastructure, also how we design it, the how. I think the how has to come from our approaches, including the idea, as I stated earlier, that even those that are kind of lay people, kind of living in communities, are critical to our design process, to our thinking process, and that we can actually break the mold, right? We can create changes that make the work that we do more centered on the humans that will eventually either use or benefit from that engineering. It will make each project more successful.
So if the engineers and designers aren't familiar with these concepts and then haven't been trained on them, what's a good way for them to learn more about them?
I think that participating in events, processes that are already happening in a community, you're going to go into, spending some time on the ground, actually walking a place, understanding what it looks like, what it feels like, who the users are, talking to people there is really important. But what is going to happen will change based on how you're listening to them. And some of that does take training. It might even take partnership with an organization in the community that is a good partner that allows you to listen well. It also takes us kind of moving out of our expert role to maybe imagine ourselves in that place using the thing that we're designing. How would we want to use it? There's a connection between humans that's undeniable. And so if we spend time in places with people as partners and participants, whether we are using participatory action research, which there's support to do, whether we're working with urban planners to look a little more deeply at a neighborhood, understand the data we can actually even pull from a neighborhood about how people are using the place that we're designing for. Those are some approaches. I think if an engineer really wants to bring on those skill sets for themselves, there's lots of work out there that they can do. They can do some kind of social innovation coursework and understand what do innovation processes look like? What empathy interviewing? How do I do that? How do I build processes that are a little bit more human-centered? And just include them in my work as practice. And what it does creates a different dynamic between Habitat as a developer and that community, so that we become more partners than we are kind of builders and residents. And as partners, we're able to actually leverage more out of our developments. We're actually able to even get local governments to invest alongside us because we have residents at the table. So there are benefits to taking these approaches, real economic benefits, and benefits for our projects. So that if we're going in front of the zoning board, for example, because we want to build more density, we need those residents to support that. So there's the altruistic component of it, of course, but then there's also a lot that we're leveraging and able to achieve because we're creating those deeper connections at the local level.